we go. Now we're recording. And schools as human systems because the whole is present in the parts. Okay. I know you've read that, but sometimes we just need to hear it again. And I've got a few quotes interspersed. So that before we move any further, I think I've moved the order of my slides 1,000 times. I want you to think about, I want you to present your articles. If you are not present, or if you already did, if it's already on the Padlet, we can pull the Padlet up unless you want to go ahead and just share your screen. So you tell me which way you want to go. And as you are listening to each other, jot down any patterns that you happen to notice while listening. Again, the reason that I asked you to do this is twofold. One is to get a better understanding of complexity and complex adaptive systems in context, and the articles give you a context. It'll strengthen your understanding of how this might potentially apply to your world that you're studying. And then, of course, to be able to share that knowledge, because there's just so much to read, help limit that so that you can focus on your own work. Is there anyone who would like to go? All right. You should have rights to share. Are you, Ade, are you able to share your screen? You are on mute.
No, I cannot.
Okay. Is that because let me double check.
Okay, you can do it right now. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Let me check the chat. Okay, no problem. You can always, if you do not have it ready with you today, that's no problem. You can post it to the Padlet. Everybody's busy with a lot going on, and I'm going to close my office doors while you're getting ready. All right.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adibola, and my area of inquiry is what strategies can teachers use to effectively differentiate math instruction in a diverse sixth-grade classroom? And so the article I picked was Complex Systems and Educational Change Towards a New Research Agenda, Educational Philosophy and Theory. Now, the article is about the application of complex dynamical systems and systemic educational reforms. The purpose was to gain insight in the urban systemic initiative by the U.S. National Science Foundation. I really like this article because they said a lot of things about how, as a researcher and as a teacher, you can actually make a lot of changes in your classroom. You can actually also change the way you do your researches just by thinking about the complex system of everything. And the study was by J.L. Lemke and Nora H. Sabelli. Now, the participants are a diverse group of about 40 leading, let me move this. About 40 leading natural science and education researchers. So it was a lot of them, like 40 of them. So now let's look at the so what. The methodology used for this article was majorly qualitative, and they did a lot of case study analysis in this. Now, the major tools they actually used in this article has to do with their insight from the meetings, workshops, symposiums, and their literature reviews. Now, the theories that actually came up in this article was more of complex systems than a little of the realist theory. Now, the framework from this article was actually to understand educational change through the lens of a complex system. Now what? Now, basically, with understanding the complex system, this is meant to help educational stakeholders to collaborate in designing educational systems that meet diverse needs and which is actually tailored to my own area of inquiry. Now, another one is moving away from simplistic causal models to model-specific changes. Not just thinking about, oh, the cause and effect, this is what actually makes this, but coming out of that box and looking at how complex the system is for us to see actually how they interact, the students, the class, the instructional design. So all of this will actually make us see the complex nature of it. And the last part is actually for researchers. They say, as a researcher, you can actually consider using experimental, compositional, and theoretical methods in area of differentiation instruction. Now, what is the usefulness to my line of inquiry? Now, like I said, I'm looking at how I can actually differentiate instruction, both as a teacher and as a researcher. Now, as a researcher, I can apply systems thinking approach for analyzing classroom properties that actually supports differentiated instruction. So that means there are a lot of factors actually working together for you to actually be able to differentiate instruction properly for the student. Another one is I can utilize complex systems to gain insight into interactions of instructional approach within the broader system. And another one is complex systems can help educators identify diverse needs and the learning trajectories of students. So in conclusion, complex system theory offers valuable insight into how differentiated instruction can be effectively implemented by understanding the dynamic interaction within educational environments. Remember, it's not just one thing. There are a lot of factors that actually makes up this. So this approach would help us in designing adaptive teaching strategies that cater to diverse students' needs. And that's the reference. Thank you.
Thank you. Cool. Any thoughts or feedback or connections before we move on? I think what I made a couple of notes, and maybe there are patterns of things that I've seen over time as I've been doing a lot of things. I see a lot of research tends to be case study, and a lot of the research always tends to be qualitative. This very much falls in line with the whole realm of qualitative research, this type of study. That was my dog I'm looking at, trying to figure out why she's playing footsie with me right now. And she's much bigger than my foot. But the other thing that I also happen to notice is this concept of it's the antithesis, it's the opposite, or it's a response or pushing back at this concept of simplistic, which is causal. We think of this concept of, well, if we just fix this, or I remember when I was in the classroom teaching, I was a literacy coach in a 7th grade classroom, and my principal says, well, Laura, just get to the root cause of the situation and you'll have it solved. And I thought, it doesn't work it's not that simple. I can't, but she was always liking to do those root cause maps, which I think is something that is taught in leadership classes. We may have some leadership experts in the room, so you can redirect me if I'm misquoting any thoughts, but I think this fights against the idea that there's one single answer that's going to cure all problems. But I'm also going to be really curious, Ade, to see, and I would love to hear from you when you get to the end of your program. I want to see what simple rules emerge from your work. Because I love this concept of differentiation because it's huge, and we need to know what good differentiation looks like, because I think it's the biggest struggle for teachers that I see in the classroom. Our mentors are not differentiating effectively. That doesn't mean they're not good teachers, but it's still a struggle. And so when we're telling our student teachers, well, you need to work on that differentiation piece, but they're not seeing good. So do they even, is there even an understanding of what that means and what it should look like?
Mhm.
So let's see what patterns you come up with as you observe in your study, should you happen to use any of the systemic thinking in whichever way you go. Who would like to go next? Okay, thank you.
Pull this up and make sure I'm gonna share the right thing. Not sure. I'm gonna. Okay, are you seeing slideshow?
Yes.
Yay! Okay. So the article was Teacher Education, a Focus on Action. And this one is broadly related to teacher preparation. It's really hard to find any articles on teacher testing in general, much less from a complexity lens. So it was nice that this is semi-related. So what is the article about? So this one wasn't really a study. This was more of a conceptual article talking about the two different theoretical frameworks of, quantitative and qualitative work in education. And it was interesting because this person said this was published in 93. And the author said that there's been a transition over time in educational research. It was all quant, quant, quant. And then there was a new wave of thinking of, hey, let's go qualitative. Let's look at it deeper. And, she's basically saying there is a tendency for one camp or the other to basically throw out everything in the other camp and not consider, the history of the research in the past and how new research builds on top of that, which I thought was really interesting. So the purpose of the article was to look at the potential of integrating those two perspectives together, looking at the change from a processed product model to more recent stuff. But what I got from it was really like, how do we put it all together and look at the bigger picture to, instead of focusing on the differences of the two paradigms, how do we get something out of both of them to create a larger picture of what we're looking at? And so she talked about positivist educational research and what she called naturalistic educational research, and how they have different perspectives of looking at teaching and teachers and education. So, in the positivist realm, we have prescriptive actions versus describing what effective teachers do. So, it's like, this is the list of things you must do to be a good teacher versus a case study. I went out and I saw one teacher and this was the cool stuff this one teacher did. Putting those, perspectives together to come up with a more complex and holistic view of teaching and learning. And she also pointed out, so like each bubble kind of like matches a thought on the other one, if you look at where it is in the diagram. She also mentioned that there was a lot of emerging information from cognitive science about learning and, different kinds of knowledge, procedural knowledge, conceptual knowledge, and that field was growing and would also have an influence on how educational research is looking at this issue. And she basically, there was something she said that I really liked. She was like, we're looking at the same picture here. We're just looking through two different lenses. And, we can learn something from each lens in different situations about what is constituting the whole. So again, this was just an article by Dr. Judith E. Rink. There were no participants, and it was more about methodological approaches and implications for teacher education. And this is just kind of a little picture of a couple of the main points, again, that she made on these two methodologies. On the positivistic side, well, actually, this one statement I think puts it together very well. There is sameness among our uniqueness, right? So positivism may look and say, it's all the same. Context doesn't matter. It's all this stuff. And they're missing what makes something unique in a certain situation, right? They're overlooking that context. On the flip side of that, qualitative work can be so focused on something so specific and so context driven that it's in danger of irrelevance to informing practice, right? Like if this only worked for this one person in this one school in this one geographic location with these 5 kids, what can that really tell me about practice? And so looking at the fact that we do have commonalities and we do have things that are unique about us, and those two, things kind of go together instead of being at the extreme of one end or the other in our thinking. And then it says the highly skilled teacher who also makes better decisions concerning what should be attended to at a higher level of functioning. In other words, really thinking and reflecting on our teaching, and what should be put on automatic, right? So it's like this aspect that there are things in teaching that we have learned to automaticity that we just do. And then there are things that we think about very deeply and conceptually, and that those are 2 different kinds of thinking, and both occur. And how are we attending to both of those things in teacher education? So one of the problems is that we're looking at teaching, we've looked at teacher thought and we've looked at teacher action, but what we really want to study is the relationship between teacher thought and teacher action. And I thought that was interesting because it kind of speaks more to that complexity of like, how are those 2 different things interacting? And then she also mentioned student thought and student action in that. So then what are the implications of this study? So the way that we think about teaching is going to influence the way that we prepare teachers. Because again, this article was more about the implications for teacher education. So different orientations to teacher preparation, unlike their philosophical roots, are not set up as competing orientations. She listed 5 different areas of thinking, and I've kind of color-coded these in their positivist and naturalistic roots of academic, technological, practical, personal, and critical/social. And she was basically saying, if you look at any teacher preparation program, there's going to be elements of each of these 5 kinds of thinking coming into the program. And a lot of time it's haphazard. It's just kind of happening that way. There may be one dominant one that's different from a dominant one in another program, and the other ones are kind of interwoven in different ways. But that really, if we wanted to intentionally look at these 5 different elements and ways of thinking in teacher and how they impact teacher ed, then it would become a more intentional whole. So skills from each perspective are needed in different quantities at different times for different tasks. And it's about how we integrate those different kinds of thinkings across a program. And you'll forgive me for nerding out here, but these are what are called groove maps for Dance Dance Revolution. And in my mind, it like really was a good way of mapping how, like, if each one of these was a different teaching situation, right? You've got different mapped out quantities of each one of these 5 things. And so it's like, they all exist in harmony, and you're accessing like different kinds of thinking and different kinds of teaching moments. I don't know. That's just how I conceptualize what she was talking about for those 5 elements. D gets it. Anyway, so how might this information be useful to my work or line of inquiry? So I'm mostly focused on teacher exams for licensure, but within that, there is the larger system of teacher preparation in general. And so I've been thinking more lately about like integrated program design for things like digital literacy and some other things, and a more holistic perspective for my inquiry. So, questions like, how are teacher licensure exams part of the larger program or system that they live within? And then how does the program integrate different forms of knowledge, including those that we need for exams, in a cohesive way for students, right? So is it like this author was saying, where they're kind of smacked together in different classes and pieces? Or is there like a holistic picture where things have been intentionally woven together? What is the conceptual orientation at our program for licensure exam preparation? Could I find a way to identify that, and what is that impact on what's going on? And then what missing pieces of other conceptual orientations could make the experience more successful? Are there other elements that maybe we didn't think about that would make something more cohesive as an experience holistically? So that was, I hope I did it right, because I feel like after watching Addie's, I didn't do it right. But anyway, that was mine.
Sherry, I did the same article. I mean, the same. Yeah. Can y'all hear me okay? Is it really loud in the background?
We can hear you, Sophia. Any comments? Did you want to present yours now, or did we want to make any comments before we move on?
Comments. I can't access my Google Drive, my district one, and that's where I did my presentation at. However, I did want to point out a couple of things like in the article too. So one thing was like the relationship between the theories and the teaching methods and how it's important for teachers to understand that. And that resonated with me because teachers must understand like that learning process, like how the theories apply. You know what I'm saying? How we take from theory to practice. Okay? Like that's a big part that I took away from it. And she did a really good job on her presentation. Like a lot of that stuff I would have never did the gaming part. Like mine was way different than that part. But I will say that I do have my Word notes, which I'm glad for that. I'm glad I did that in Word. Let me jump over to my notes so I can talk about how I would apply that to my research. So the alignment in pedagogy and learning theory, because y'all know I'm trying to like fix the world with teacher development and how we're teaching reading and we're holding accountable. So applying the concept of my research by examining with the culturally relevant pedagogy, like being able to take those theories and methodology and putting it together. And then teacher development and assumed learning process. So considering how teacher development programs can incorporate cultural competency, explore how teachers are conscious about the learning process, both culture and cognitive. So I think that was a big goal. Just being able to teachers being aware of what they bring and what they think and how it affects and influences the implementation of the RTI strategy. Then I pointed out addressing the need for professional development that supports teachers in adapting. So I think that this article, like, it addressed how you can adapt those things, those different pieces. Then the next biggest observation for me in reflection was encouraging teachers to observe and reflect on their own practices within the cultural development framework. So this article just really, it gave the perspective from the researcher and the teacher, you know, and when it did that, I was able to see how I could approach my professional development intervention, or I think we came up with another word, y'all. I don't remember what our other word was, an intervention, but I guess answer to the so that was my takeaway. But as soon as I get to Mexico tomorrow, because I have to be able to connect to like real side and get real customers to this. And I'll get on my
Well, thank you. You remember a lot. I'm impressed that you can remember all of that, but I guess when you live it, you know, you can speak about it. Any other comments before I say anything? I was very impressed with your diagrams, and because here's what popped up as I was looking for this while you were presenting. In the book that I have shared with you, whoops, yeah, that one, the Learning Ecologies book. This is the one, I'm sorry, gotta look at my camera. There you go. Now you can read the title. This is the book that I sent, so you don't have to squint. I sent you the link if you are interested in. This is where so many of these diagrams are coming from. And but look at this. I'm going to make a copy of this page for you. Oh, trying to make it straight. What do you notice about this page and one of the diagrams that Sherry posted?
If you pin back this way, you'll be able to see the diagram easier.
If I do what? Oh, here's my camera. Maybe I should point it directly to the camera. That would help. I was trying to show
arrows.
the arrows, right? And which way do the arrows point?
Both ways.
Exactly, both directions. So what you talked about was this whole concept of tension, relationships in tension, and balancing those things between the positivistic and the naturalistic forms of research. the argument is that they're both valid. It shouldn't be an either or. The authors are encouraging you to consider both, and that although positivism came first, it was the linear way of thinking. It laid a foundation. It didn't disappear because naturalistic inquiry came. And I don't know if you've learned this, but in any research courses, you may have, I don't know where you are or what courses you've taken, so forgive me. But naturalistic, that is it is the baseline. It is where qualitative research comes from. They go hand in hand. That's what it is. It's all, as opposed to the quantitative research. It's very numerical. You can't argue. People say you can't argue it because you can't argue with numbers and that sort of thing. The one thing I want you to recognize is people will say, but my study is just one little teeny tiny case study. And as I was told, yes, but it takes a lot. You just keep doing it. You replicate studies that have been validated and such in order to prove or disprove whatever is out there. And that's something here that I think this chart, it said it was the mechanistic view, the complicated view versus the organic view, which is the complex view. So there's your organic view is looking and describing what you see in a classroom in order to understand the qualities that you can't describe it, you can't change it. You have to be able to name it to be able to do something with it or about it. But just think about it. Test scores is all about numbers, right? And we need data in order to be, and so qualitative data is about the language and about the observations. That's our data. And which is why we go into this coding system. Quantitative also has its own coding system as well. But it just made me think that in my research, that's what I came up with. I found a lot of this balancing of these two things, because what you will find if you continue to go down that road with HSD or any of these tools that they're talking about, it's not tension, it's this balancing. It's not good or bad, it's what exists, and it's an interdependent relationship. You can't have one without the other and have some sort of sense of balance and interchange going on in your system. There's a codependency there. So I think that that's a key point that you find that this article supports. I also thought I was intrigued by how you had the three, the cognitive, the three different, those were different maps. Those are different systems that you were showing. And I think that's something that I wanted to bring out in our work today, is that when you're mapping your system, you're not necessarily just mapping one system, because it's a nested, that's a word that I didn't see come out in our whiteboard. Complexity is about nested systems. So is qualitative inquiry about nested sociocultural theory that I know many of you have either cited or have heard about. It's all about nested systems. So I think that's just interesting to see these overlaps. What else? Those are the big things that I thought that came to mind when I heard you. Has anyone in the room heard about Pamela Grossman? Anything, read her work? Or of course, my field was literacy and I came up with that, but she talks a lot about teacher education, teacher preparation. So I don't know if it's worth a visit to support or give you another dimension in this world of teacher prep. Testing, the way I look at it is testing is your focus, but it's one piece of that whole big picture of teacher prep, as you said. So I don't know. And there's other people, not just her. She's just a mind. And when I turned my head, I thought I had one of her books there, but I didn't see it right off the top. All right, where do we go? Anybody else would like to share anything before we move on? Okie doke. Well, look for your colleagues' work on the Padlet. They will narrate their presentations and hopefully be able to share some insight that we can use as we move forward. And I'm looking for here we are. Okay, so we've just talked about our presentations. So here's another quote that caught my mind, and that was complexity theories up until now have been mainly descriptive, what we were talking about. But human system dynamics not only describes, but can also be used to explain how they work and how they can be influenced to bring about change. So I think that if you continue to work the process, it might lead to a desired change or to some information that you can establish your own set of rules, your own set of conditions based on the data, based on your observations. So here's where I want to go next. I think we may go ahead and pass on this slide because I don't want to run out of time too much. But we have talked about adaptive action, simple rules, and pattern logic. By the end, I'm going to one of the readings in the module today has to do with the generative engagement model. Just one more piece that of all the tools that they talk about. I was also going to ask you to think about naming your challenge in just one word, but we don't need to do that right now. We may come back and visit that because I think when you narrow it down to that focus, it may change the way you think about things. I want to talk just a minute about the mapping though, because I'm going to ask you to go into your breakout rooms and help each other with where you're going and where you are in your process for the mapping. I know this is tiny. You don't have to read it. I'm going to just try to explain my thinking behind it. So this is what I observed. Again, it was descriptive. This is my coding of what I observed across 2 classrooms. You're going to see colors, you're going to see codes, you're going to see words in a variety of ways because I kept adding layers after layers after layer. My study, I'm going to skip ahead because I need to show you one thing that'll make more sense. Let me show you this model first. If you look at, which was to say that when I started my study on expository writing and what is effective expository writing, I used what research had showed me were good traits of a writing teacher. And those were these conditions right here that we call a priori. So they were already established in the literature: empathy, inquiry, authenticity, apprenticeship, dialogue, revisioning, and deep content learning. And that comes from my work with the National Writing Project and our local site at UNT. So these were these things that were constantly circling and cycling. And so everything that I coded was somehow in relationship to this at some point, because that's what methodology I chose to use. Okay. So in the course of this coding, I found these patterns because remember, it's always about pattern seeking. What I want you to recognize that to a certain degree, each one of these little things were their own little systems. I noticed that both teachers were always hooking the reader or using text response activities in their classroom. For example, they were constantly defining vocabulary, or they were constantly encouraging students to tell personal stories, or that the students were constantly talking and discussing with each other, for example, or contemplating big ideas, and it goes on. I just had meant a lot. And these were all the different patterns that I found, but I couldn't talk about all of it. I had to narrow it and focus it and whittle it down in order to find my answer, so to speak. So these little lines are the pieces that informed or that supported this category that I came up with. So, and then what I started to find were these tensions, like process versus product, process versus the aesthetic reading versus effort reading. Those are English language art. Those are terms from the reading world. What else did I find? So I started to see these tensions in my data, and that teachers were constantly having to battle one piece of writing a theory or a way of approaching instruction versus another. And they were it wasn't a battle. It was just that I saw this interdependence of stuff constantly. So I was coding for that as I continued to go on. I found then that, and I kept trying to create my own little labels and such, also because I needed to submit this with my dissertation and it had to make sense to somebody else besides me. And so what other codes did I find? Then I started to also code it according to those a priori things like empathy and apprenticeship. And I kept seeing these things just keep popping up: inquiry, dialogue, etc. So one of the things that I'm showing you this is that your map can be this, what's the word? I want to say simple or unrefined. I did this on my iPad. I took all of my transcripts of the data that I had collected, and I wrote in the margins and I annotated it, and then I transferred my thoughts into something in a way that I was trying to visualize and make sense of what I was reading and what I was concluding, or the themes and the categories that I was drawing from my data, and this is what I came up with. But that in the end it's just a mess. And it was this mess that made me realize, man, there's a lot of stuff going on and it's really very complex. It's not so simple as if you do this, you'll be a great teacher and everybody's going to pass the expository writing test, because there's all of this activity and it's all interrelated. So I had to continue to whittle it down to some conditions and patterns, which is how I ended up with this diagram. So I had to indicate where it started. I kept trying to say that these things are constantly in motion. It wasn't you move from inquiry into authenticity. It's constantly, they're interchangeable and they're integrated and overlapping. Then from there, and I have other charts in between, but I'm not bringing you all the other stuff that I did. But then what I found was, and this is all color coded. Boy, this was a feat. How do I communicate this complexity was my challenge. I came up with generalizations or big ideas based on some other patterns that I saw, and these were the patterns. Teaching, writing involves routines, yet responsive action. There's that balance. Teaching, because I remember being told, no, use the word yet, Laura, don't use but, because that shows there's a contrast. Because I think I said but, and I was redirected. Apprenticeship makes learning visible. Expository writing shares genre boundaries. Self-discovery informs expository writing. Structure matters. In expository writing, instruction and reading and writing are inextricably linked. So those were some main categories out of that mess that I came down to. Now, from there, I continued to refine it and say that my final conclusions, if you want, the implications from or conclusions were that writing instruction is a complex system. Critical thinking and inquiry facilitate insightful expository writing, and expository writing is a dynamic genre. So all of this becomes my conditions. These things are the conditions for teaching for an effective expository writing classroom. All of that shows these were the three, I should say, bodies of action that were going on. There was this constant movement of reinforcing structure, whether it was classroom structure, whether it was structures around a type of genre. There was a constant motion of mediating transactions and balancing the tension. So this is my description of the complex system, but this is specific to expository writing. So here's how I tried to show that relationship between the two. And so that's what this mess is all about, and the symbols that I used. Now, I'm not asking you to create that, so to speak, but I think some of you are already thinking in this way. Your map can be something like this. You could be something, I want to say, as archaic as a hand-drawn this is what's in my brain. I think that's the word I was looking for. It doesn't have to be fancy. What I'm asking you to do is to think about what is it in the system or systems of my problem as I understand it today, right now, because you haven't reached the now what. That's because you haven't done your dissertation. You haven't done the research, but you know something from your background, from your lit reviews, from your experiences. You know enough because you came to this point to be able to describe it. Now look at the patterns. I want you to look for patterns more than anything. Be able to, you're laying out your cards. You're throwing out all 52 cards in the deck to figure out, how do these fit together? How do they relate? What are the relationships? What are the patterns? If you can, but you have to put out all the pieces in order to do that. So again, it doesn't need to be fancy. And so here's some more things that as I was composing this to think, how can I guide you? And I need to stop talking so you can get working, is this. Think about this. How many systems exist within the overall system that you're mapping? These are rhetorical questions that I want you to think about. What key principles from complexity or complex adaptive systems are important for describing your system? That was why I wanted you to start with the mapping. So I would like to add the words nested systems to that board. How can vocabulary, well, we just talked about that. So these are some things that came out of one of the more recent articles. These patterns: nested systems, or a sense of nested organization. The capacity for emergence. You guys saw that and have talked about that, which is your self-organizing emergence, which is the CDE model. And you may need to read that over and over again to really understand, what are these CDE business? What does that mean? Because I know we're not doing justice to it. Maybe if you want another course, I'm happy to serve. Will allow me to teach this again, and if you want me to come back. It's about reciprocal interactions. That's that interdependence and the capacity to adapt or learn. Systems learn from within, not because of there are exterior things that can influence the system, but they learn from the interactions from within, which is then the creating novelty through building blocks that you saw listed in one of the articles that we were talking about. Things build upon each other. So think about these elements and add this to that whiteboard as you think about, how am I going to map my own system? Because I know that's a big question that you're all thinking, how am I going to go? So these are the things that I want you to think about. Prior knowledge, teaching professional practical knowledge that applies, emerging concepts or knowledge, the learning curve involved in your system, the context. I think a lot of you have talked about that. Competing ideas, which is your tensions, interactions. We talked about that. Simple rules, social or cognitive. Think of the term affordances versus constraints. That's another thing to balance. I remember reading that language in some research, and I thought, where are the people? And then I said, well, what are the affordances and constraints? And they said, what are you talking about, Laura? And I now realize that came from HSD language. Social constructs, inherent knowledge, cultural practices. Not just, how does culture impact your system? That's a huge piece to think about. And you can go lots of directions. So we talked about that. And I'm going to come back to talk about the bibliography assignment, because I want to put you into breakout rooms so that you can share with each other where you stand with this. I will drop in to be able to talk with you and support you in how you're mapping it. Is that a good idea, or do you want to stay in the big room? Do you want to talk as a whole? I thought maybe small groups would benefit you guys better.
Are we sharing what we've already done? Because I gotta say, everything is still in my head. I haven't been I've been thinking and thinking and thinking, but I haven't put pen to paper yet. So I don't know. I don't know where everybody else is.
You know what? I think that's okay. I think a lot of times, a lot of things don't come, which is why probably post a lot of things later because it's always ruminating in my brain. If nothing else, I would say maybe start sharing some of the CDE work that we did last week. And maybe, what are you thinking? If you do nothing but talk with each other and share your thinking on where you're at with this, maybe what you're doing can help someone else, or you can ask each other questions. Does that seem reasonable as far as work time for you all to do, to be able to work on your maps together? It's a dialogic process. So maybe you just need this, what Graves would call rehearsal time. Question, do you want groups of 2? Do you want something a little bit larger to groups of 3? How many do we have left in the room?
I think the larger team might work well.
Yeah, the group's already pretty small. We could probably just stay together.
Say it again. I'm cool with that. I know some had a
I'd
bad.
like the whole group.
Okay. Well, who would like to share where they're at now in their thinking about their map, or maybe what questions? How can maybe we can answer that and probe for each other?
I can
Okay.
share. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, mine. Well, maybe you can answer this for me, Yesenia, because I'm gonna ask the world's dumbest question, because I've read it and I've read it and it was presented multiple ways and there were great examples, and I'm still having trouble trying to figure out what my dang container is. Like, how am I gonna look at, like, am I looking at a teacher candidate within all these layers of stuff? Am I looking at, like, so what's your container? What are you, I mean, have you at least gotten that far? Because I'm stuck.
So I think we're kind of on the same boat. Because I'm thinking about parent perspectives about family literacy programs. So in my head, like I was like, so is my container the family literacy program? But then also you have the influences of the home. So I don't know, my container's probably gonna have doors that allow other things to enter in. That's kind of like what I was thinking. I was thinking like my main thing is the family literacy program. So that was going to be my container. But then I also have like home influences and then school influences. So those are going to be my doors.
Think about your container as a shared identity. Okay. I'm looking for something to give you a stronger response than my interpretation. So keep talking. But I want to hear your questions so that I can direct you better.
So maybe shared identity would be parent in the family literacy program, or student in the educator preparation program, or I don't know. I guess you could get really specific on the shared identity if you had like.
How about, I wonder if it could be teacher seeking certification, because that's something they are all in search of. D, I was reflecting on something that you wrote somewhere. I'm not calling you out. I just happened to think about this, but you mentioned something that maybe your container had to, or maybe I'm putting words into your mouth, but it's your classroom. It's you're trying to address and develop a stronger
I already did.
teaching.
Right, right.
That's our container. This is our container. What pulls us together? What the topic of complexity, that you're all in search of new knowledge, or PhD students or EDD students in the doctoral program. So I think of that as maybe a container is purpose driven as well. I hadn't thought about that until right now, but I think that is going to be part of it. I'm going to keep looking. Keep going. You guys.
For sure. I think I've got a focus on adult learners, whether they're potential students that I'm trying to get in or the students that I already have that I'm trying to improve for, but then I'm also the adult learner that's improving for them. So
I think that's something that we have to add to our map is that you're going to find in your research, our positionality has a lot to do with it because it's how you see things and what you know and what you bring to the table. So that's relevant. I think in Sherry's case, she has several, I mean, she's a learner, but she's also a director of certification. So she has a perspective that is different and maybe a motivation. A director of in the field of certification is what I meant by that. Dee is a professor in the field that so that's a different positionality than someone who's writing curriculum for you, for example. You're in the midst of it. We have your as principals and teachers and such. That's part of our map. It's part of our shared identity, or it informs our identity. Keep going. Sorry. So think of the container as the similarities that hold the system together. Let me go back to our map. I'm going to add some terms on our whiteboard. Here it is. Yay, it's stapled. Anything else you would like to add? So we're thinking about our containers. That's really tiny, isn't it? So let's just go around and talk about our containers. Maybe it would be useful to add let's do another whiteboard board and add another page to it. And you start creating your own containers. Just brainstorm. That's where we're at. Let's just brainstorm our containers. So let me think. I'm going to think right here. We are self-generating right now. We're adding something. Okay, let's go to this. I guess it moves this way. I've never used this tool in Zoom. I've always used other tools, so I'm learning with you. Start posting perhaps start brainstorming your containers on this whiteboard.
Like everybody pick a corner or something.
Pick your corner. As if we had only 4 people in the room.
There's the center.
That's right. You guys know what to do. I'm just going to add the definition to help us think about it. What are the things that hold your system together? Also think of a container. A container has sides, right? A container has walls. It has boundaries. So think about the boundaries that define your space. So I was thinking testing. What's a boundary in testing? Well, similarities that hold you together and boundaries. Let me add to the definition. I think you started to talk about doors, Yesenia. That would be part of your container. Could they be social boundaries? Could they be political boundaries or elements in your container? Could they be emotional or informational? So in a sense, they are things that are this, that can, your container is defined by the things that are the same within that space. So I'm thinking of my home right now because I'm hearing little voices in the other room. And could be some of you know and some of you may not know. I have a small house with where my daughter and her two children that are toddlers live. And so my container are the boundaries of this house, but it's the fact that we are a family. We're an extended family. We're a multi-generational family. And that within the boundaries of this house, we also value reading and education because of what my daughter's studying, the fact that she is very verbal with her children. They talk. They're very prolific 2- and 3-year-olds, I will tell you that. But she also reads to them prolifically. And we discuss a lot of things that I probably didn't do with my children. That was a long time ago. So perhaps from that sense, you can think of, okay, what is it not? Well, because of the multi-generational age, we've got anywhere from 2 to the opposite extreme, which would be me. And you can see I have white hair, so you can only imagine what that end is. But the point is that those years, I bring wisdom to the table. I don't have the energy that the toddlers have. I bring experience to the table, whereas they're very inexperienced, but which also leads to the concept of tolerance as opposed to patience. And yet I'm constantly saying when they are demanding, be patient with me, I'm working on it. Because I couldn't click the TV changer quite fast enough. Let's see what we've got growing here. So in a sense, you can see how this is developing the identity of a system, because these are the things that define the system in terms of who they are and how they fit together. So I wonder, I'm thinking about the testing one, for example. I wonder if testing is one of the boundaries, the test itself. There's many tests that the students have to take, but one of them is particularly more challenging than the other.
When you say boundary, do you mean because it is kind of like a dividing line in the program, right? If you can't pass this one test, you don't get to the final semester.
Exactly.
So you're kind of stuck.
It's a threshold, it's a wall that they have to get past in order to move on, just as you described. So I wonder if your system testing is a system within your system.
Right.
So I think testing is just a piece of it.
Yeah, because I'm even thinking of things about like, so when you talk about interactions of among the system and things changing, right? So say you have a group of students struggling to pass the test and they complain to the dean's office about a policy, and then the dean's office goes and talks to the faculty, and then the faculty talks to the students, and there's all these things, and then the policy changes, and then that impacts all the students, and then maybe some of them like it and some of them don't, so it's like, it's not just the test itself and where that falls in the curriculum, but there's all of these outside things that are changing the procedures themselves over time that the students are experiencing, and they influence that, and then also, receive influence from it. And so I don't know, I almost just want to like get a piece of chart paper and do all these crazy arrows and then just see where it might like go.
That's exactly what I want you to do, because I think that's when I say it can be as rudimentary as pull out a pen and a marker and just start drawing. Draw what you see and why you described it, because I think you just described the exchanges. What are they saying? We know that the people are the students, but then you just introduced the dean and the professors and the policymakers, the people in your office who have to deal with all of this. I mean, there are so many people that get involved in this simply because, and I guess I'm thinking, okay, if the passing rate if the test was easy enough for everybody to pass on the first time, then this wouldn't be, so maybe the threshold of the test itself is a factor in all of this. I think one of the questions that I have, and I'm only bringing in my insider's view because I'm one of those people in the field that hears this and checks up and has been influenced by it, because it also influences how many people we have in our program. It influences the size of our courses. It influences money it becomes an influence, because then there's possibly funding, accreditation. Those are all part of the system of teacher preparation, because the system, it requires that you have certified or qualified teachers, an alignment of your courses, and that you have the numbers to keep the program accredited. I'm just brainstorming things that I observe within your system. Excuse me, I'll be right back. You can go out. Out you go. Let's look at some of these others. I'm wondering, I'm looking at the container for the differentiated instruction. And I'm wondering, I see students' learning abilities and I see teaching styles. I'm wondering about teacher preparation or teacher knowledge. How much do teachers know about what it means and looks like to differentiate? Is that something within your system?
Yes.
So I have a question for this one, because I'm going to move. I see something peeping here. Can I move this up here so we can see it? I'm sorry if I make anybody dizzy with my movement. Apologize. Adult learners, the potential current myself, my program, getting students in it. I'm assuming this is UD, and if I'm incorrect, let me know. But I'm wondering, did you mention that you come from the nursing side of the department?
Not nursing, but clinical bedside patient care. Yeah, for over 20 years.
Okay, but what does that have to do with your program? I guess I'm not.
So it's a health services administration program. So it is people who are at the bedside who want to advance and go into leadership, but there's not a lot of advancement opportunities or educational opportunities for them other than nursing. So it's your radiology folks that are highly skilled at their position and their, clinical areas, but there's not a degree pathway for them. So this is created for them, for those type of people, your medical office people, your radiology, all of your patient care folks that are not nurses.
So what does your program offer them?
It's a healthcare administration, so it gives them pathways to leadership and advancement to obtain their bachelor's and go into, to be able to advance their careers, where otherwise it's kind of a stopping point. I was originally a 911 paramedic, and once I got that, there was nothing else. So I advanced myself with a bachelor's, then with a master's in healthcare administration and leadership. But there's just not a pathway for these folks. So my students are adult learners who are coming back, trying to advance their careers. I was them at one point, so I identify with them, without that way.
Container.
Ma'am?
I think you stated what your container is in a sentence right now.
Yeah.
What you all have in common is this desire for advancement, is to be degree seeking. Has yet everyone, and so look at that tension. Degree seeking, yet you, meaning your students, this group of people are seeking a degree, and yet they're very skilled. They come with oodles of experience and knowledge, practical, learned on the job. They probably were certified in some capacity to be able to do the work that they were doing. And that's not a nothing. That's not a snub in the nose. That's deep. That's heavy. But and as opposed to it, but yet it's very different from higher education degree. And I think that's something that you described in something that I wrote somewhere.
For sure.
Excuse me. So it's it's all of those descriptors for this type of learner, this individual. These are maybe something that pulls you to get all this group together is age or experience level, because they're probably not spring chickens that were just hatched out of, not elderly, but they have lived long enough to have developed clout in their field. So what's the boundary? What are the walls that confine them?
They all have that lack of pathway.
Okay. They don't, lack of directionality, because they don't even know where they're going. Your pathway or what the program you're developing, it's not to keep, I'm not trying, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but thinking it's not good teaching, as I think you have tried to describe in some things that I've read. Sorry, I get tongue-tied. It's reaching them where they're at and meeting their need as an adult, trying to take the next step. Because if they knew where they were going, they would stay. If they could see the light at the end of the tunnel, if they knew what they were trying to go for. But I didn't hear a definition of what the program offers. Because as you said, you're still developing it. It's a pathway. So I don't know, that's what I'm hearing. Please take that for whatever it's worth.
Yeah.
And just, this is what this is all about. Let's just talk it through.
Mhm.
Exchanges, course enrollment funding, families, coworkers, do you know? Okay, so Sherry, are you building? I see you moving from container to exchanges.
I have the C, the D, and the E a little bit. I
Okay,
think I need to go back and look at my notes for more if I was gonna add. I'm not sure if I'm gonna trash the SRL thing for the purpose of complexity or not, because I do see self-regulated learning skills and abilities within an individual as part of the student portion of the system that is influenced by many things. You know, it is part of what I'm considering.
is
and I
that is that a constraint? Did you just describe, is self-regulated learning a constraint within the system? Because
I think so, because there's things within it about, you know, like you start off with levels of, you know, self-efficacy and motivation, and when you're done with it, it's like a cyclical thing, right? So at the end, you're giving a causal attribution. I did well because I worked really hard. I failed because it's so and so's fault, right? So like, depending on how you attribute success or failure at the end, that feeds back into self-efficacy and motivation again. And it's not a fully linear cycle either. It can be little loops within a larger loop and other things like that. So it's like a system within a person that is influenced by other systems outside the person. But I don't know how to put that on paper. And for the purposes of this class, I'm considering giving up on it because it's too complicated.
you know what I would do? I think it's important, and I think it needs its own map. And I think maybe part of your map is going to come from your literature review, because I'm begging the question when I'm talking to you. I mean, I have my own concept of what it is based on my years of education, but I'd have to look it up. The question is, what is self-efficacy? I know that's a big word. In what is self-regulation? What does it look like? How do you know if you have it? How do you know if you don't have it? Why do some students need it? Why don't other students need it? Do all students use it? Does it impact the success rate of some students more or less than the other? If you don't regulate, what's the opposite of it? I'm sorry,
Right.
I'm just spewing.
No, you're good. You're good. Like, I mean, and it involves things like knowing what you do and don't know. So like the student who comes, oh, but I'm ready to test. I'm ready to test. Let me test. I know everything. And then they go and they bomb because they don't really understand what they do and don't know. Like that is a small facet of self-regulated learning, is like understanding and checking yourself and using strategic study skills and time management. Like all of that is involved in the bigger picture.
That's your map. You just described it.
I don't know.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, this is very much like it might be part of the what. And I mean, not to be reductionist, but Julie Mills and I are doing a metacognitive awareness inventory. We just got IRB approval. And so over the next year, we're going to have students take that survey to measure global self-regulated learning skill. And we're going to like see if it's correlated with passing, because maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe nobody needs it. I don't know. I mean, I have a hunch that it matters based on stuff that I've read, but it may not actually make its way into my dissertation. We'll see. I don't know.
My assumption is that yes, of course it matters, because I'm thinking about reading instruction, self-regulation, how we organize ourselves and what we believe about our abilities matters. But how do you prove that? And what, and so you're going to gather what I'm assuming is going to be quantitative data in order, but then my question would be, but what does that look like? That's what the numbers say, but what does it look like? Because when I think of, and I'm making my own connections to reading instruction, the fact that a student can stop and is reading a paragraph and says, oh, I don't understand that. That's
And then
self-regulation.
they go, yeah, that's one of the 52 items on the survey is, do you stop and reread when you discover that you don't understand, or like, you know, that kind of stuff. Those are all part of like, is highly metacognitive, but like, that's not all. I don't know if
Well, and maybe your
I'm not
study,
explaining it right.
I think you are. I think that the struggle here is that you do have, you've taken a quantitative turn to something that is that's a much bigger issue because you have narrowed it down. So what will you do with the results once you find them? Once you figure out that, yes, they do or they don't use self-regulation.
I think, and this is just where I'm thinking right now, so I don't know if it's actually going to happen, but my thought was, if those skills are important, then the question becomes, how do we support students in obtaining, gaining, mastering, whatever you want to call it, those skills throughout the program, right? Like, if you need them to be successful, how are we supporting people in having those skills? Or just say like, oh, you don't have it, doesn't matter, and walk away? Or, I mean,
Well, how do you teach it? How do you teach an adult learner?
well,
how to-
there's been several intervention studies that actually explicitly go over this, like you're cueing reflection at different times by having, like, the way a lot of people do it is they embed certain reflective activities in certain specific ways where you're saying like, did I understand this? Rate it right now. Like at the end of this class, let's say it like in 10 minutes, you wrap up and you say, I want everybody to rate right now your level of mastery on, can you identify your C, your D, and your E? And then we all personally rate that. And then you say, okay, now reflect on your rating and make a plan. How do you need to correct that understanding for mastery before we meet again next week? So like little things like that are like some of the intervention stuff, but I don't know.
Well, there's two things. One, I realized that it is almost 7:40, so I probably need to stop chit-chatting with all of you and get back to where we were before. I'm going to stop sharing this. Because I don't want you to, I want you to do what you need to do, but I don't want this to be a wasted effort that, you know, all the work that you're doing in this class shouldn't lead you to, man, I spent a whole month doing something that I really didn't need to do.
No, I wouldn't classify this class as something I didn't need to do. I think I would classify this class as making me question what I focused on previously.
Okay. That's good. I'll buy that. I'll take that. I'm going to switch gears because you also made me think of something else that I wanted to say and I forgot already. Let me see if it's, let me just see, I'm sorry. I'm hung up on your issue. But I see what you're doing is one of these things. It's one piece of the bigger puzzle. And yet it could be a very elaborate one of these. So I think it belongs in whatever you're doing. And then, oh, I know. Where did my slide go? Is this it? Okay. I see I moved things around and here's what I wanted to show you afterwards. I had a now what. Everything you saw me was the what and the so what. In a dissertation, you have to have a now what. So what was, I mean, now I wasn't going after an EDD where it's a problem of practice, although because I want to research because I love doing it. But I did have a whole section on instructional implications. So I'm not going to describe them to you, but these are the 4 that I came up with as a result of all of that mess you saw me describe. Develop the writer, not the writing, frame the dialogue with discussion protocols, teach an inquiry, and read and write every day. So I could probably write chapters on each one of those things. But that's my now what? That's my suggestions, and that's the action that can come from what I learned in the research that I did. So each one of you, and I think that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to come up with implications based on what you have learned. So enough of that. Let's talk about the assignment that one of your assignments is the annotated bibliography. Just understand that an annotation is a brief summary of content and a short response or analysis. You have done that in this presentation over one article. I just need you to find 4 more. So basically take whatever you did in the presentation and sum it up in a piece of writing. It's probably going to be 2 paragraphs. I ask you to find 5 scholarly articles that relate to your inquiry, and maybe it's one of those many nodes and complexity thinking. Cite your bibliographic information in APA format. Use or organize it by alpha order of the last name. That's how you list them. Your first paragraph is a summary. Short paragraph includes the brief summary of your content. I say to when you're not sure what, because some of these articles are messy and it's like they're exhausting to summarize and it's really hard. The abstract is a good way to see, because they had to, those writers had to do that. They had to write their abstract, but also consider using the framework of what, so what, now what? What was this article about? So what did they do about it? Who was involved? And now what were their conclusions as a result? It's really, that's why that cycle works for me all the time when I lack other things to say. And then you've got the second paragraph is going to be to write a concise reflection with respect to your inquiry or this course. You might not have an answer with respect to your inquiry, but you might have it in terms of what you've been studying in this course. So I don't want to pigeonhole you with something that you are not ready to answer yet. Consider the thoughts about its usefulness, validity, and application to your work. And then I just listed a couple of resources that I found online. This was when I said TAMUC and annotated bibliography, there's a professor who put his out there online from a class. And I actually had an example of one that I did in my graduate course, and I seem to have, I don't know where it went. I was going to try, I can share that with you because it just gives you an example of writing. These paragraphs are not pages long. They're short and concise paragraphs. Questions about that assignment?
That is due tomorrow by midnight, right?
Is that what I wrote?
I think
No.
it said June 20. Am I making things
That's
up?
Thursday.
Is it Thursday?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know why my brain wanted tomorrow. I know that tomorrow's the 19th because it's Juneteenth. I don't know. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Dr. Slade, can I share mine quickly and show you what I did for the first one? I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing.
Yes.
Okay. Can I share my screen?
You should be able to interrupt whatever I have. Yes. I'll
Okay.
stop, but it should supersede. There you go. Carry on.
Just a minute. Okay. Okay, so this is what I did. I had the topic. Then this is the first one. Do you want us to do the reference this way, or it's going to be at the end of everything?
I would put the reference at the top of each article because it'll make more sense.
Okay,
So
so that's what I did. First
Yep.
one.
like that.
And I went to what? I don't know if you want us to do paragraphs or point. I just did bullet points like this. Then I went to this. What?
I was going to say theoretically it should be a paragraph, and the what, so what, now what is just a framework to help you wrap your head around the paragraph.
Okay, so now I have the now what, then I have the usefulness to line of inquiry. So you want us to put them in paragraphs, not like this.
Yes. I
Okay,
have 2 paragraphs. The citation, 2 paragraphs. Summary, reflection. The first paragraph's a summary, the second one's a reflection.
No, I'm confused. Can you say that again, please?
It's you have your citation as you do here. I don't know if I have a pencil. You can't see my cursor, sorry, but you have your annotation, that's perfect. And then take your what, so what, now what, and condense it into a paragraph.
Okay, okay,
That's your summary.
okay.
And then a second paragraph is as you put it, I think you said implications for use. So it's your reflection. Why useful is to your line of inquiry. Perfectly. That's it. And then just put that into a short paragraph.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, that makes sense.
Thank you. Does that make sense? Is that doable?
Yes.
Okay. If I know everybody here in this room tries very hard to respect deadlines, and I truly appreciate that. It's a fast course, and I am lenient with all of that because life happens, and I know that it happens to all of us, including me. So you let me know what you need, because I want this to be, none of this should be busy work. If it's busy work for you, you gotta then let me know, because I want this to be useful for you, and I want you to feel successful. So let me see, was there anything else that we needed to talk about? I think. Oh, one more quote. The usefulness of this work is the underlying assumption that understanding how a system works can lead to knowing how to influence its future behavior. So there's the answer to my big question of how am I going to get to that end? And I think I remember putting guidelines for simple rules at the end, mainly because you read them in the article. I'm not going to read them to you here, but after reading a lot of your simple rules, I think you got the gist of it. But I want to encourage everyone to remember that, or think about maybe the work that you're doing is going to result in a set of simple rules that pertain to the systems that you're going to be that you're influencing and that you're describing. Maybe by the time you come up with, those are your implications. I think that when I wrote my implications, I guess that's what led me to the question, how will you revise your simple rules after completing your dissertation research? So when I think again about the testing situation, what simple rules will your data tell you that you want to your teacher candidates to know in order to be better test takers, for example? I don't know.
Right. And that's one of the tensions in the system, right? Like, we just want them to pass versus we want you to know deeply your content, and you will just pass because you know your stuff.
I think that's an excellent point. And that's part of the tension too, is that how come they don't know this stuff already? By the time they get to this point, I think that was an assumption. These assumptions are part of our system. The assumption when I came into this department was we don't teach test taking. And I can remember coordinators talking about, well, they just have to go study because we don't teach test taking. We teach how to become better teachers. That's just something they have to pass on their own. And they should be everything should be in place for them because they're college students and they should be able to know how to study for this. But evidently that's not true.
So that's interesting. That's like a dichotomy, like a pedagogy versus content train of thought with like some people split.
And it has influenced how we do things, because for any number of reasons that I bet you'll map in your system, this has changed, as I have observed, what's going on in the department and how we are approaching things, how we're approaching our courses, etc. It's imploding from within, and old systems are being exited whether we like it or not, because we can't maintain that line of thinking that I just described because it's not working.
I had a conversation recently with someone who wanted to like do away with the certain course grades or GPA on certain clusters of classes. And they were like, well, if the GPA doesn't map to how they do on the test anyway, why are we requiring the GPA? Why can't they just take the test? I was like, well, if the GPA doesn't matter, maybe we're not teaching what we say we are in each class that's mapped in the alignment charts for the test, but I don't know. So it's interesting. I'm sorry, I don't mean to dominate. Tell me to shut up.
We could continue. So I release you. No, classes, I'm happy to continue talking, and I don't know if that I got around to talking about each one of your maps and things that you contributed. But please don't hesitate to reach out to me and say, hey, can I just have some time with you? Another student has already asked, we talked, we sat down, and I tried to clarify some things. So please let me know how I can help you through this, because I know it's not easy. But don't make it harder than it needs to be. Make it useful for you. And that's it for tonight. I hope this was useful. If not, you let me know, because I need to be improving all the time. Oh, I did put in, there was one more thing I did put in there. You're going to see this. There's an article on the generative capacity, what's it called? Generative engagement, excuse me. And these are the 3 elements of generative engagement. I'm not going to describe it, but this is a worksheet you could use if you wanted to include any of these 4 areas that we've talked. You can use those to help you think about what questions to ask yourself and of the information that you have that informs your system that might help you just figure out what do I need to plot. And then you can see you can see how the lines intersect and such. Okie dokie, I'm really done. Sorry. I won't say another word other than good night and have a great evening. Bye-bye.